Brother Arnold.
Okay, I promised that I would give you a scenario to think through. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go ahead and read the scenario. And then while you're working through that, or while maybe some of those thoughts percolate, we'll also look at some other ideas, and I'll give you some ideas about how to analyze scenarios, or how to kind of work through them, and then we'll divide up into groups. Try to use the time well, so I'll have to move pretty fast. But if you get into groups that are roughly like 5 or 6, and try to say, let's do a mix or something. So, if I'm thinking of, let's say right here, you guys are all, I'm going to guess, younger than 40. And you guys are all, like this table and the table behind you, you guys are all, I would think, in your 30s. And so I would think it would make sense if like half of you guys joined here and half of you guys joined here. And then we have like a mix, if that makes sense, of just different, anyway, so we don't just form groups that are most similar to us or something. That's a good missions experience right there. We'll mix it up, right? And then you'll get about maybe 10 or 15 minutes to think through and analyze together, and I just ask you to write down a couple of bullet points of big ideas and pick a spokesperson. So those are your 2 jobs, really, 3 jobs. Have a discussion, write down a couple of bullet points of ideas, and pick a spokesperson. And at the end, we'll go around and I'll get you to share some of your ideas, and we'll work through or struggle through some of those questions. To that end, I'll start out by hitting the 2 scenarios that I mentioned last night. I mentioned a scenario where it's in the Philippines, a couple comes, seemed like a very solid, stable family, some small kids, and they seem to be doing well, and they've been together for 8 or 10 years, till you find out that one of the spouses had a previous marriage, and that marriage still legally exists. There is no divorce in the Philippines. It doesn't exist. There's not a legal structure for it. And so that marriage fell apart. It lasted a year or 2, and then it fell apart. And then he was cohabiting with the lady that he's now with, but they have now for like 10 years, and they've had several children, and they've established a family. And now, actually, when I heard about the situation, they had already been baptized, and they're wanting to go forward. So you say, it's my pastoral duty to blow your family up. You guys need to move, like split up, so the kids need to grow up without a father. He doesn't even know where the woman was that he was with before. There's no way of like legally tidying it up. What do you do? My coworker, so this was at the church where I pastored, I took over from my coworker. He was the one that mostly had to wade through this. So if you don't agree with my conclusion, you can just blame it on him. But his working through that was that though he could not do a legal marriage, he could perform a kind of an informal covenant type ceremony. If you wanted, you could stretch it, maybe call it like on the religious side versus the legal side. We struggle with this a little bit in our context because legal and religious always go together. Russian believers probably would see less of this because they have a separate legal ceremony with the government, separately a religious ceremony that they do in their churches. So there are probably 2 there's a civil component and there's a religious component that's happening when we do a wedding. We generally do them together. So he performed a kind of informal commitment ceremony, charged them strongly they are to be faithful to each other and only to each other, marriage type concepts and those kinds of ideas. And then they went forward with it. And a lot of stuff in missions is kind of like that, sub-ideal and sort of provisional, trying to figure out the best you can do given the circumstances. That happens a lot. Okay, it's kind of like swimming on that one. It's just thorny. I raised another scenario where your neighbor approaches you, and he's a Muslim imam. Wife down like a full hijab, just the eyes. Very friendly family. Kids, our kids' ages. So this is ongoing. This is our next door neighbors right now, and so he's very committed. The kids came over, I was replacing my garage roof, and the kids came over and helped us, and then they had to go because they needed to go do the 1:30 prayers. So, I mean, they're very committed, and dress and everything, beard, everything like that. And so he said something about, do you want to go on this hike with us? I'm basically taking my youth group, and you guys could join us, and we're going to go hiking in the mountains. So would you go or would you not go? And my answer on that was, absolutely I'd go. Now, it turns out it was on a Sunday, and so I said, yeah, I'm committed on Sundays. But to spend an afternoon with him and with a Muslim group, I guess I would say something along this line. I have an extreme confidence in the robustness of the gospel. That if I'm walking with a Muslim group, I'm familiar with their teachings. Anyway, I'm just very confident in the robustness of the gospel. And so long as that family is willing to countenance me, I am going to try to. I've already had 2 different extended conversations with him where, he's talking about his faith and I'm talking about mine, but he let me give a full presentation of the gospel. And I'm just going to keep on doing that. I'm going to keep on doing that until he cuts me off. I don't think he will. I think we're friends. I like him. I really like him. Anyway, I pray, you can pray for him with me. I love that guy. And that guy belongs in heaven. That guy belongs in heaven before the throne. And his family belongs in heaven. That is the right place for a human being. The right place for a human being to be is the presence of God. Pray with me for him. But that would be my conclusion with that. Okay, how about, here, I could put up a picture too that maybe would just illustrate. Edmonton it's a fascinating place. I love it. And I don't quite see anything on my end yet. Hopefully, I don't know if you have it on yours. I'll see if I can connect up to it. Within sight of my front window, if you look at my front window, looking out, just living room, you see the minarets of the mosque. It's a Shia mosque, just right there. So you can be from my house to the front door of the mosque in about, 2 minutes of walking. If you keep on going there, you get to a Sikh Gurdwara, which is Sikhism is kind of like a mix. Yeah, sure. I got it. Thank you. Sikhism is a mix of Hinduism and Islam. But I've been in that Gurdwara a number of times. Have a burden for those people. This is the mosque, one of the mosques that is close to us. Here's the thing that's very distinctive about Edmonton, about the situation, is if you look across that, do you notice anything about it? Anything about, what would you pick up from that image? Obviously it's a mosque, obviously it's Friday prayers, obviously it's packed. Anything else that hits you there about the picture? What's that? Absolutely. Good. And that's very standard for mosques. The women are going to be in another room. My wife was there, in another room back behind, and they're going to be probably either watching on a screen. I've been in some mosques, like in Zambia, where you're looking through kind of some brickwork. But anyway, you're not going to be visible. So if you go as a family to a mosque, you split. You have separate entrances. Like from the time you leave the parking lot, you split. And definitely if you're female, you're like lower tier, for sure. I mean, yeah, the optics and everything of that. Definitely you're lower tier. Good. Anything else? Any data or, any just observations that hit you from it? Nice. Excellent. There are some lower level things here that I noticed that made me kind of smile. Everybody's in coats, and we call them toques, but hats. So you can tell it's a winter city. Ethnicity, I'll comment on that in a second. But the observation I was really hoping you'd pick up, I look across that and I see all middle-aged men. I talked to the imam after the prayers, and we asked him, what is your biggest challenge right now? And his comment was, well, we're losing we're losing the next generation. And if you look at the statistics, this is Statistics Canada, so this would be like government level, census level data. But people check the box what they are, religion, that's one of our options on our census. And the greatest fall off, first generation to second generation on religion, is Islam. First generation, they arrive, the parents are still thinking in the mindset of Lebanon or Pakistan or wherever they came from. They're thinking in that mindset. Kids grow up, the way one guy said it to me, yeah, we just want to be regular Canadians. Meaning, we don't really have a religion. It's kind of what's in the head. And so the kids grow up secularized, and they basically just want to work a job, make money, and like have a nice life. And there's this major stress on the parents because the kids are not adopting their faith. And so first generation to second generation, Muslims come, second generation, it's just empty. It's like there's not a religion. You know, I look at that and I go, opportunity for the gospel. Huge opportunity for the gospel. In fact, if you compare, Islam has that massive drop-off. Sikhism has that massive drop-off. If you look at Christianity, it doesn't. Christianity is far more retentive than the others. And I would argue that there, in terms of authentic Christianity, I think it's growing. At least in Alberta, I can't speak for all of Canada. But there's growth. I think that's awesome. Because I think there's actually something in the case of Christianity that's not just cultural exchange, but it's beauty and it's truth, and it grabs the human heart and won't let go. So I look at that and I see opportunity. And you can pray with us. I mean, these men, they're praying, they're determined, this is their faith, but it's saddening. Okay, I'll show you one other, and this is, I mentioned Sikhism. This is I hope this comes through, yeah. This is every year, an annual progression that they make to the Sikh Gurdwara. And same, a deep burden in my heart here for these people's salvation. Maybe the audio will come through, let's see. So pray with us. This is easily walking distance from our house. And if you go out on that day twice a year when people are doing this, you wouldn't think you were in Canada at all. There's no reason to think you're in Canada. The only way you'd know you're in Canada is you see the badges on the police officers' jackets. That's the only way you would know. But the intensity of that, just huge numbers of immigrants around us. Okay? Whatever. We can talk about politics endlessly. I'm not even a voting member of the country. So politics, it is what it is, but they're there. Politics, it is what it is, but they're there. Since they're there, God is bringing people to our doorstep from all over the world. Let's reach them. We can have a political discussion, whatever. These are human beings, and they need salvation. And so you can do the politics side, but since they're here, let's reach them. I'm going to read this, and here's a scenario, and then I want to give us probably about 10 minutes, and you work through and see what you think. Sorry, it's a little small, but hopefully you can hear it, and if you can follow along, all the better. But I'll do my best just reading it off the screen. Bill looked at the police officer with uncertainty and frustration. The officer had asked him for 50,000 rupees for the return of his driver's license. It was Bill's 12th weekly visit to the headquarters since the license had been confiscated, and his resentment rose as he faced the possibility of yet another wasted week, clouded with uncertainty and unpleasantness, unable to use his car. Must he sacrifice his principles in order to resolve the matter? The problem began when Bill had returned from a missionary assignment out of town. He was coming into Bandung, West Java, along the main highway from Cirebon, the same road on which he had left the city 2 days before. The chaotic congestion was about normal in this heavily populated part of town. Animals, trishaws, and people were weaving their way in and out among the motorized traffic that crawled along the road toward the urban open market. For some time, Bill had been caught behind a slow-moving, overcrowded bus, and there was little chance of getting past it, even when it stopped to allow passengers to alight. Suddenly, Bill was jolted to attention when something hit the side of his car. Before he knew what had happened, he caught sight of a policeman approaching the car and shaking his fist. By the time the officer had picked up his baton from the street, Bill was out of the car and prepared for the worst. Fellow missionaries had warned him never to tangle with the police. In fact, it was missionary policy not to call the police, even in the case of a house burglary. Experience had shown that it was cheaper to sustain the loss of robbery than to bear the frustration of red tape and the loss of further property taken to headquarters to test for fingerprints. Bill did not have to wait long to find out what he had done wrong. For several hundred yards approaching the market area, the highway became a one-way street. Buses and other public vehicles were permitted to use it in both directions, but private vehicles had to detour around back streets and rejoin the highway several blocks beyond the market. Bill pleaded that he had seen no sign and had simply followed the bus. The officer walked Bill back 20 yards and pointed out to him a small, mud-spattered sign obscured by a large parked truck. This did not seem to concern the officer at all. There was a law and a sign, and Bill was guilty. Officer Samojo escorted Bill to the local police post in the market. 5 other officers materialized from the stalls in the market. So Samojo began to explain how very embarrassing it was for him to have to prosecute a foreigner and how he regretted that Bill had put him in this difficult position. After some time, Samojo suggested that the whole thing might be smoothed over quietly and without further awkwardness if Bill would just pay a token fine of 500 rupiah, $1.20 US, on the spot. Bill had been expecting just such a request. Without even asking if it was a formal, legitimate fine for which a receipt could be given, Bill quickly protested that although he might be technically guilty, Indonesian law had a system of justice and courts where such matters were to be settled. He would go through the proper channels and requested to be allowed to do so. The officer scowled and told Bill that he would have to hold his driver's license until the case was settled. Bill could come to the police headquarters the following week to get it back, and since no receipt was issued for the license, Bill secretly feared that he would never see it again. The following week, Bill went to the appointed office only to be informed that the license had been sent to another department on the other side of the city. After a slow trip by Trishaw, Bill finally found his way to the other office. The policeman in charge had a record of Bill's offense and said Bill could talk to the captain, who would probably be prepared to settle the issue for 1,000 rupiah. Bill suspected dishonesty and requested an official receipt for the money. The man just smiled. Bill told the policeman that he had come to Indonesia to build efficiency, justice, and a high standard of morality in the country. He would prefer to go through official channels. At that, he was told to return in a week's time. So, week followed weary week, with hours wasted and more hours spent waiting in office. Each time, the amount requested for settlement rose higher. Bill worried about what he should do. He didn't want to be a troublemaker, but as a missionary, he had to take a stand for honesty. His Christian witness depended on it. His whole upbringing as the son of an evangelical pastor had been one of strict integrity. He had managed, so far, to maintain this standard in previous encounters with immigration officers and postal clerks. Yet while he felt he had done the right thing, he still felt uneasy, for he knew full well that government officials were so poorly paid that they had to make at least double their official salaries on the side if they were to feed and clothe their families. The whole system was unjust, and he was caught in it. Bill talked to some other missionaries. They just laughed and said, "Let us know how you get on." Now it was the 12th week, and he still did not have his license. Moreover, the amount being asked to settle the case had risen to 50,000 rupiahs, US $120. Should he pay the official and end the case, or should he appeal to a higher level officer in hopes of a just settlement? Bill looked at the officer and said, "So, there you go. You'll get together with your group, you'll weigh this out, work through. I think good questions to be asking would be things like, okay, what is the ultimate end goal? Like, what are we really trying to achieve? What are we trying to accomplish?" I think it's a very fair goal to ask, what is the realistic goal? Politics is the art of the possible. Sometimes missions is the art of the plausible. What am I actually going to see happen? Like, what can I achieve here? It's also valid, I think, to ask, what's the downside risk? Like, if this goes sour, what really could happen? Is it worth it? Or how would you navigate some of that? Okay? So I want you to work through some of those questions. If you get stuck, or if you're not sure even how doing some things, happy to, I can swing by, I'll walk around a little bit and give some help if you want. And then what you're looking for is just a couple of 3 or 4 bullet points. You don't need to solve the whole thing, but a couple of 3 or 4 bullet points of biblical, practical, theological insight that at least would push the conversation forward, help us to think about it in a deeper way. Any questions about what we're doing? All right, let's split up and let's see what happens. Give you about 10 to 15 minutes. You're going for 3 bullet points and a volunteer speaker, please. Okay, let's wind it down. So the comment here, I've already lived this out. And so, right, I mean, this is not theoretical, this is not distant, this is real world, and there's people in the room that have lived this. I actually had put down as one of this, I mentioned those other 2, I put down as a scenario, because yeah, I was in an office and a guy wouldn't give me the paper, and he's like, oh, this is complicated, this is gonna be expensive, and he knows and I know, and we both know. It's like last year, the other person just printed it off for me. We know this is simple, but we both know what's going on. So you lived this, right? I mean, this happens. I'll also say about these scenarios, if you're kind of somebody, a chat back there, if you're kind of thinking, what's the right answer? If you found the right answer, good on you, because I don't have like a right answer. These things, by definition, are set up to be kind of, they're insolvable. They're not solvable. I mean, you're not going to figure this out. But what you can do is kind of get some concepts or principles that help you in the right direction. What group wants to go first? Great. So who's your spokesperson?
With an attitude of love towards the officer and not resentment. And then the scenario that Monty and them have lived through is that they knew the family, and so instead of just saying to the officer, well, here's your money, the missionary said, well, how can I help your family? And put it towards helping the family instead of the corrupt system. We look at like Matthew 5:40 and 41, where Jesus said, if a man sues you and takes your coat, give him your cloak also. If someone wants you to go a mile, go 2 with them, and respond with that kind of an attitude. So now he's had opportunity to minister. Instead of showing an attitude of, I resent your system and therefore I'm going to go higher and higher. Yep.
Love it. Super. Great. Excellent. Good thoughts. Okay, someone else. Who else wants to go? I'll get back here. Just don't know how to solve that conflict.
Okay, so we had the same one. Interesting, we came up with a different answer. But just to preface this, I've known of missionaries that have been in different countries that in order to make checkpoints, they have to pay. And the answer back, of course, was they could never go anywhere if they didn't do this. So that's one thing. Now, in this particular group, we kind of decided that he should not pay. And we had several reasons why. One of those was to abstain from all appearances of evil, which obviously, that's Evie's not going to take part in a bribe. But we also had the idea of this. Now you've got this person here who needs to hear the gospel. So if at all possible, we're going to share the gospel with him, and on 2 fronts. One, it would be, of course, that he could hear the gospel message. At least it would be in his mind now, if he did not want to accept that on the spot, which often we know it takes several times to go to a person. The other thing was, we're going to explain to him who we are. We believe this gospel. We believe everything that we're telling him, and based on those things, we can't participate in this, bribe, for lack of a better term. Whether that has any effect or not, we don't know, but we've done one thing, we've shared the gospel. Now we get kicked up the line a little ways to the next guy. We go through this same scenario, and you mentioned 4 different occasions where this could happen. And as far as, I think we want our end game to be, we've shared the gospel 4 times. Was it worth the price? Yes. At some point, we're going to want to see a magistrate. And that's kind of where we left off. We don't know how that would go, if you would be granted that, or if you just keep kicking the can up the road.
Excellent thoughts. Here, I'll go first in, I really like it that we got 2 different directions on it. Sure, give me a quick second, if I may. Thank you. Okay, 2 things that hit me real quick is, to your point, and against yours, I have known guys, and this was in Zambia, a guy who, in order to get across, and this was like a Kenyan national coming into Zambia, in order to get in, and he was in a bad situation, he couldn't get past the checkpoint, so he paid the guy off. And when he now entered Zambia, we're a year later, but they can tell by something in the past, like the way it was written, there was something that was kind of fishy. And so the later immigration agents can look at it and tell he's paid a bribe before. And a year later, even though they don't know the same people or anything, nobody's talking to anybody, but they can tell, they know if he'll do it once, he'll do it again. And so they're gonna like just squeeze it out of him. Okay, so that's to your point and against theirs. Okay, to their point and against yours. A problem you have in these systems is you can escalate up the system, but the entire system from the bottom up, it works on this, it's like circulatory system. Those resources flow all the way up. And so you could keep on going higher and higher, but at every level, the next level just supports the level below it, and it supports the level below it. And you could end up on the national level. It's sort of the assumption, like somebody, somewhere up there, as I work up the system, there's some like piece of the government that's like, no, we're gonna root out corruption. And the answer is, probably not. Probably not. Yeah, that'll work. Yeah, no, I would definitely do that, yeah. And I think that's a case for mission boards. I know this gets thorny too, but you know, we kind of have this discussion of churches and mission boards and how those kinds of things work. And if a church can fully help a missionary work through all those scenarios and things like that, that's ideal. But most pastors I know are very busy people and very stretched. And yeah, it can be, I call my mission board in those scenarios because these guys have lived them and done them. And so they'll have some insights that are just a lot of experience, and this is kind of like what they do. It's almost like this is professionally what they do. So yeah, I totally concur with that. Okay, please, fly.
The term we're using is bribe.
Yep.
But that's not the term they use.
Good.
It's a fine.
Yeah.
And a fine is a fine. If you don't know that it's a bribe, so you go outside of that scenario and say, I'm not going to pay the fine, but I would like to help your family out.
Yep.
And now you're ministering to him and his family knowing that he doesn't make much money. You can even say that.
Yep.
And so we never even got a fine.
Yep.
There was never a fine even mentioned. We just helped his family.
Yeah, no, that's good. Yeah, I think that's a great point. And I would probably nuance that a little bit. I'd say in most of these scenarios I've been in, it'll be kind of like bribe-ish. But part of what's going on is a difference in my North American framework is it's just or it's not. And they're just not thinking of it that way.
Right.
We're just not, I mean, I'm thinking like, I see it, it's a bribe. And they're just kind of like, no, I mean, it's how it is. I'm a police officer, 50% of my pay is expected to be through these fines. So I've got to make my salary. Like what, you want my kids to starve? It's just a different way of thinking. Okay, comment over here, please.
I had a similar situation. I'd been in Nicaragua for long enough to kind of know how everything worked. And down there, they didn't have radar, they didn't have money for squad cars. The policeman would stand at the side of the road, and if you crossed the yellow line or the white line in the highway, that was an infraction. And he would stand there and put his hand out. And if you didn't stop, he did have a telephone, and he would call ahead, and you'd probably end up in jail. I got stopped one time, knowing what was going on. The officer walked up to the car. I asked him what the fine was, and he told me, and I took the money out, and I put it in a track, and I said, "I'd like to help your family." And I gave him the money and the track, and he waved me on, and that was the end of it. Otherwise, he would have taken my driver's license, taken it to the local police station. You still have to pay the fine. You're going to have to pay the fine one way or the other. I went into a room that was about half the size of this one, and it was full of people trying to get their driver's license back. So you could spend 2 days in there just trying to figure out what's going on. So sometimes there's different ways to work situations out to everybody's benefit.
I'll sort of seed a little bit of a question here, which goes your direction, and the question goes, like, one of the questions that we were talking about between these two groups is what constitutes a bribe and what constitutes a fine. And some of what's going on is in my North American structure, these generally stay separate and clear. And that's super nice. I mean, this is going to sound real funny. You guys will laugh at me. You don't have to even agree with me. It sounds real funny, but I'm just going to say it. So the two northern countries in North America, Canada and US, are some of the best run governments in the world. That'll encourage you about the state of the world. It'll encourage you about the state of the world. These are very well-run governments, and you know how it's going. I'm not saying that they're great, and I'm not saying that the problems are solved. I'm just saying things are a lot worse out there. And you live in places where the corruption goes from the bottom to the top, and it's explicit. And it's just like right out there. So in North America, Canada or US, I don't ever worry that the police officer is seeking graft right there on the spot with me. And if he does, I'll get his badge number and we'll get this taken care of. And in the Philippines, good luck. So, I mean, for whatever that's worth. It's just kind of like, okay. All right, anyway, there you go. But so what is a bribe? What constitutes a fine? And this scenario with Bill, I'm trying to figure out exactly this is some of the space between him and the Indonesian guy he's talking about. What does he think, like what components does he feel like he needs to see that will then make it feel official? Like, do we need, I don't know, do we need like an office? Like will a table under a tree constitute an office? Do we need that? Do we need a nameplate on a table? A receipt? Like so the guy gets out a piece of paper and he writes out his name and an address and he puts an amount on it, hands, there's your receipt. Will that count, or does it need to be on a printer? Is it handwritten won't work? Printer, is that what we need? Like what exactly constitute a logo? Do we need a logo on there? Like what constitutes official? That's some of the slippage space. That's the difference between Bill and the guy he's talking to. In the back, please.
We didn't get all three of our summaries or bullet points, but we got two. One we were talking about where Jesus is saying to render unto Caesar the things that are Caesar's, unto God the things that are God's, and that was something we talked about. Is this fine or this bribe, is it something that's duly owed to the government? So we're considering that scriptural principle. And then the second one was not violating this guy's conscience. And if he's pushed 10 or 12 weeks now, apparently it's a matter of conscience to him. And for him to then turn around and pay the fine, unless he has a complete change of heart somehow or comes across a scripture passage that's going to, the Holy Spirit's going to use to say, you need to pay the fine, pay the bribe. He's going to be violating his conscience at this point, 10 or 12 weeks into it. And the Bible says, to him that knoweth to do something and doeth it not, to him that is sin. I think the the opposite is true as well. Let each one be convinced in his own mind what he does. So I would say the guy is in a predicament. And the third thing we talked about was then the unjust tax collectors of the day, in Jesus' day. And culturally, everyone knew that they were dishonest. But they were the guys that came around and collected taxes, dishonest or not, and so they were despised by the people, but yet they still paid their taxes because it was the government representative coming around asking for it, even though they knew it was dishonest. So those are just some scriptural things that we came across to help us through the situation.
That's great. I really like your last example on here. Reminder that Jesus actually was in mission scenarios like this. Pretty tight. Yeah, and he paid the temple tax. In the temple tax, that's a super interesting passage in Matthew. And Jesus basically argues, well, he says, my Father owns the temple, so why am I paying the temple tax? This is the drachma tax. Why am I paying the temple tax? My Father owns the temple. So that's super weird, and it doesn't make sense. And on paper, I have no reason to pay this at all. I have no obligation on paper to pay this at all. All right, let's pay it. That's the logic of it. I have no obligation. It's rightfully, I don't need to do this. I have no reason to do it. I'm not required to do this, not necessary. Great, let's pay it. Yeah, I think that's pretty tight. It's pretty helpful. Okay, this group up here, I don't know where the microphone did it up. Go for it.
He wasn't wrong to appeal to a higher authority, but he should have stopped appealing once he saw how far the corruption went up. And you made that point before. And his main goal in this case wasn't to spread the gospel, but to make an exterior stand for justice. His 12 trips to solve this problem was taking time away from his ministry, and it was going to take away more money from his ministry too.
Mm-hmm. Good. Yeah, I mean, whatever is going on here, however it's working as you're escalating, doesn't seem to be working out so far. So, yeah. And it's not getting any clearer either, is it? It's not like as you push your way up the system, ethically, it's more transparent. The amounts are going up. Even at this point, if he pays out the $120, he has ruffled so many feathers. He's probably not going to get away. I don't know. This is gonna stalk him the rest of his ministry there. Like he's created a mess for himself. But whatever. If he wants to keep on going higher, I don't know. It's just going to get worse. All right. Yes, sir.
I just think context matters. We can call it a bribe.
Good.
In that country. We
Yeah.
can call it a fine in that country.
Yeah.
In the United States, we call it a tax.
It's good.
How do you follow that?
What do you mean marriage problem? Oh, yeah, my suggestion on that, and it wasn't actually what I ended up doing, but my coworker did it. It was before me, and then I inherited that couple when I took over at the church. But he did a kind of sort of like informal, non-legal commitment ceremony. And it's sort of we did the best we could, challenging this couple to be exclusive to each other for life in a marriage-like kind of commitment, which we recognized we acknowledged was not recognized by the Republic of the Philippines, but was a kind of a commitment towards exclusive covenant loyalty to each other. That's what he did. So it sure helps in our context that it's both religious and legal, and generally these two things align. Sure helps. There's plenty of countries where the legal side of what is a marriage and the religious side of what is a marriage diverge widely. And obviously on some points in our North American systems, it's already starting to diverge. So, Yep, they do that in Russia. It's very common for the believers there to do a legal and a separate religious ceremony. So, great. I think we need to hear from at least one other group. Yes, sir.
I think in the scenario, the first fee, fine, tax was about $1.25. Am I right on that?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so what we know from the scenario is that unintentionally, he broke the law that was pointed out to him. The officer asked for a fee, fine, bribe, tax, whatever, and that was culturally acceptable. And we can't superimpose that we know what he was morally going to do with the money.
Right.
Okay? And he has been presented so many different opportunities to present the gospel. And he, in the scenario, has not done so. So, first of all, we would say that he would need to, we want him to present the gospel, as has already been mentioned,
Yep.
to present the gospel to the officer, to the first police department location, to the second one, to, each one as opportunities presented, because that opportunity has come to him because he didn't want to pay the fine. He has been presented unsaved people all along the way that need the gospel.
Yep.
And that happens to us as well, okay? Our second point is patience in James 1:3.
Knowing this, that the trying of your faith worketh patience, but let patience have her perfect work, that ye may be perfect and entire, wanting nothing.
So he is in a situation where his patience is being tested, and his testimony is being tested, and his presentation of the gospel, and his relationship with the Lord. And so he is, he needs to consider this. We all do. I'm saying he in the scenario, but this is us. This is us.
Good. Super good.
In these situations. Another one is wisdom from God in James 1:5.
If any of you lack wisdom, let him ask of God, that giveth to all men liberally, and upbraideth not, and it shall be given him.
And he has the Word of God, he has the Holy Spirit, he has his mission board, he has other missionaries that he's been in fellowship with, that he's talked to. He has all these opportunities to secure wisdom for this particular situation to do so. Number 4, help with their needs. And this has actually been mentioned as well, but not just with the officer, but with all of the officers that he's come into contact with. Whether this is a fee, a tax, or a fine, whatever it is, he has the opportunity to serve the Lord in the manner presented in James. James 1. Is this the James?
No.
Okay, sorry. Again, he knows that this officer is poor. He knows all the officers are poor. And he has the opportunity to not pay the fee, which we don't want to pay the fee. And we also don't want to go on to court, to the higher magistrate. But he has the opportunity to take care of a need that he is aware of. Bringing food to them or something like that. Putting money in the track was one thought somebody had mentioned. But bringing them food that would take care of a family or a police department or something like that. That's not going to be such a big expenditure for him based on our culture and stuff like that. Yes, as a missionary, he's got limited funds, but still, the payback is great because he's already damaged his testimony. He can't really reach those men with the way that he has gone, but this would be an opportunity to do so. The last one is, again, to go the extra mile, and that was kind of the same thing.
Beautiful.
Yeah, Matthew 5:41. And whosoever shall compel thee to go a mile, go with him twain.
So here's this idea of $1.25 is we waste that every day, basically. And he has the opportunity to really invest in all of these men and women that are in those police departments.
Love it. Super good. Great. Hey, this is a great discussion. Last parting thoughts before we go. I've got a couple of maybe 6 or 7 ideas here. Yes, group right here. Somebody wanted to give a comment?
So what we had a lot of options we could have, but if he paid the money in the beginning, he might get his license back. But since he kind of refused to pay, there's really no way he's going to get it back, I don't think now. Since the government is corrupt, it's messed up. But he could have asked believers to pray for him and really shared the gospel. Even in refusing, like if he wants to do this honestly before a judge, we didn't really know if he'd ever get to a judge because it took so long to get to the
Right.
higher offices, so
Right.
kind of stuck.
Right on. I already heard this solution over here. I think it's pretty good. Buy a bike. Anyway, I like bikes. When I do my classes, I bike to my classes every day. Buy bikes. I got around the Philippines a lot by bike. Actually, that's sort of a little bit of a pivot. So this was a thing in the Philippines where I'd be with some of my coworkers, and if you came through as an Anglo, your percentage, it wasn't terrible, the system wasn't terrible, but your percentage of likelihood as an Anglo of getting flagged was a lot higher. And so I'd watch them get their license taken and stuff like that. So I don't know that we would have done it forever, but for the 8 years that we were there, it worked just fine for us to do public. We're with people, sitting on a bus. You're right. I mean, you're literally, when I say you're with people, you're with people. You're with people all the time. But, you know, I'm there for people. And so that was actually really awesome. My best witnessing conversations were with bored, sleepy taxi drivers who were desperately trying to stay awake and so needed to talk to somebody. And so we'd talk about the gospel. And about every taxi ride, I'd share the gospel. That was all the time. So being in taxis was a real good thing. And you know what? If an accident happened or they messed up a traffic law, it's like, I'm so sorry, sir. Here's the fare so far. I get out, flag the next taxi we go. It's done. I had accidents happen to taxis I was in. Oh man, I feel really bad for you. Pay the fare. You're done. So that is a decent solution for it. A couple other things I wrote down that were things that came to my mind as well. Wise as serpents, harmless as doves. So you, right at the beginning, you look at the situation, seek to do whatever you can to get yourself out of the situation fast, because it's going to get worse. You mix both of those, like harmless as doves is a big deal, but wise. Like you really got to look and think through the situation. That scenario I said with a paper the guy wouldn't give me, and I'm sitting there. I knew, like, I didn't want to pay the bribe, and I'm sitting there like, what am I going to do? So I just pulled out my book and I read. I knew I'm just going to have to wait him out. So I sat there and read a book. People came by, talked to people, and just wait him out. And then at some point, a guy walked in the door, and he said, "Oh, Pastor Joe, how are you? And so he walked by, and the guy that had given me trouble before goes, "You know Kuya Bong?" I said, "I do. He goes to my church." 5 minutes later, I had the paper. So he knew that I knew somebody, and that guy would be on my side, and he's like, "Okay, things just got complicated, picture just changed, here's your paper." Out the door we went. Okay, so I was the missionary that would show up at immigration. She'd bring snacks for the guy. It's not a bribe, it's just being nice. I mean, it's not like sin about giving a guy snacks, but you just kind of know, right? Yeah, you just kind of know. Okay, how about a question like, who is the government in this scenario? So the idea he feels like, okay, I need to go up the chain till I get to the government, and then like I'll put my case before the government. Government's standing right in front of you right now. In our systems, we sort of feel like, this is why I make my extremely contentious and sketchy assertion that Canada and US are pretty decently well-run governments. It's a really weird comment to make. But at least generally-ish, what's on the books, there's at least an attempt to try to follow what's on the books, at least publicly. At least there's an attempt. And in the Philippines, there would be a lot of laws that were on the books, and they just were like totally ignored, and it just didn't matter. So the government is standing in front of you. The government ultimately is whoever really kind of has the biggest gun and is in charge. That's what's going to, and I love a notion of a rightful government, but the guy in front of you has power. And you can keep up going up the system, they're all going to stand up and cover each other's backs. So, do you want to try to bring about justice in the country? I mean, sure, I'd rather live in a country that's fairly just than a country that's highly highly corrupt. But I don't know that I went to the mission field to transform the entire government of an entire system from the bottom to the top. And plausibly, it's not going to happen. I went to the mission field to share the gospel. Sometimes we're like really social justice reformers kind of scare us in our own contexts. Then we go to other people's countries and we get real social justice reformery. You're probably not going to fix their system. So you just work and do your best that you can. Part of what's going on in this situation is honor. So the reason that they're raising the rates on him is because they feel it's a question of saving face. They feel like he dishonored their authority. And in his mind, these guys are being corrupt and unjust. In their mind, this arrogant foreigner walked into our country and immediately starts throwing around his weight and telling us how we ought to run our system. And we gotta, like, if this guy is gonna be like anything but a revolutionary, we gotta bring this guy down about 19 notches. And so, actually, probably they've been a little gentle with him, that they've like let it go up slowly, ratchet up slowly, instead of just, okay? And he's got to figure out how to give honor back to those guys and acknowledge them as the rightful authorities, because they are, like it or not, the rightful authorities in his town. So he's got to figure out how to give honor to whom actually holds the honor, Romans 13 sort of sense. If he doesn't, he won't be able to survive in that town. These police are going to make his life miserable. They will make it impossible. He's got to figure out how to restore that relationship if he wants to survive in this city. Yes, sir? And they could make a case, and they would not be wrong. They could make a case back at him. You're concerned about like injustice or a bribe, something being a little slimy. But we're seeing a lot of pride coming out of you. I mean, they can make that case, and it's kind of that, some of that attack sticks. I would say the team concept really helps. One of the points I've heard made with this scenario is he asked the other missionaries, and they said, "Good luck with that." Bless their hearts. I think they failed him. They should give him some help, and they honestly should be speaking into his life like, "Hey, it's not just pragmatic. Just pay the bribe so you can get out of it, but like humility. Hey, you got to build some humility into your life." The last thing I'll put in here is I think I get a pretty good picture in Philippians 2 of a person who had, you want to talk about justice and the rights to something, Jesus had all rights over everything. And he laid it all down. And he suffered, actually this is pretty helpful to me as a gospel concept. Jesus suffered the ultimate greatest injustice in the history of the world. The thing that Bill's struggling with is, it shouldn't be this way. This is not right, it shouldn't be like this. Okay, at the center of the entire biblical story is a massive injustice. Here's what that looks like. All the sins of all the world were laid on the person who was the innocent, holy Lamb of God who had done no sin. And the central injustice of all time is that he suffered and died when he had done nothing wrong. He carried all the sins when he had done nothing. And he accepted it, paid the price. There you go, kind of fit with that. He paid the full price that was entirely unjust to an entirely corrupt situation, or in an entirely corrupt situation. And he brought about true justice so that I could be forgiven. So at the center of my salvation is a scandalous injustice where the holy God justly, in this case, the payment made to the Father, a just payment. But the scandal of the cross is the basis of my salvation. And so when you face some of this injustice that's out there and something inside of your heart rebels at it and goes, this is not the way it ought to be. It's like, right. It's not supposed to be this way. And someday it won't. when Jesus is king. Okay, but in the meantime, while we're trying to work with a profoundly unjust situation, we kind of lay ourselves down. And yeah, I mean, we can do what we can to try to bring up rectitude as much as we can, but at the end of it, yeah, you're going to suffer a lot of injustice on planet Earth. Your Savior accepted it, so you work within it. Okay, I don't really mean that as a very simple there, solved. I'm not sure pay the bribe is, I like some of the solutions you guys gave were great. Go the extra mile by investigating, hey, what else can I help with your family? All those things are like real smart. So it's not super bribe-ish or smarmy or messy or shady. You don't want to go shady, but you want to show love, like excessive and love, well beyond. And humility. Humility is going to help a lot. All right, thank you. Speaking of patience and humility, thank you for putting up with me going over time. You guys gave some great input. I enjoyed it. I learned from this interaction. Look forward to tomorrow and talk more about missions. And the idea tomorrow is to talk about how we can individually, all of us, grow and be active in missions. What can we do? Whether that includes going overseas or right here, what can you do that's a strong expression, practical expression of missions in real life today? So that's what we're looking forward to. Thank you for your time.